Okay, if you leave that out of the question, because we're not talking about that right now, it just got awkward all of a sudden, eh? Welcome back, everyone, to the Balanced Purpose podcast. We have Andrew here and me, Fabian. We're part of Keeper and Sage. Today we're going to be talking about the last topic that we were discussing at our men's circle. We were talking about I brought up the difference, how we generally talk about self-care. And it can be misconstrued with the notion of selfishness, especially in a world where we tend to be very giving towards other people, and a lot of people derive the self-worth from sacrificing themselves. So with these people, we always like to talk about, hey, you got to think about how you're going to build yourself up, your energy levels and your sense of self-care. But how do they distinguish between self-care, which is healthy, and the negative connotations of selfishness? So we brought it up, and we had a very good conversation. I think we're just going to be covering a bit of this, like a summary, and our findings since that last circle. So I'll just check in with you, Andrew, like in terms of for yourself, how do you feel you practice self-care?
How do I practice self-care? I'm not really sure.
Okay, well...
So I'm stuck, sorry. Some things came to mind, but as they were coming to mind, I was like, is that self-care, or is that just like I try to eat healthy, eat clean, so that I don't feel crap.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to take care of myself. I'm not obsessive about it. I eat clean and simple so that I can feel good.
Mm-hmm.
I have started meditating again recently after a bit of a break.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel that is self-care, even though it's not always pleasurable. Because meditation can be uncomfortable and it requires discipline, but I do see it as a form of self-care. I think playing guitar for me is self-care, especially doing it in a way that doesn't drain me. So just to sum up real briefly, like I find a real difference between learning a song versus just playing with the guitar and just like jamming myself.
Right.
And so learning a song, even though it's really fulfilling and satisfying, but it doesn't really feel like self-care. But if I just don't give myself a particular goal that I need to achieve with it, I can just like jam on the guitar.
Right. Yeah.
Then it feels like self-care because I'm just letting myself just play.
So I guess when you mentioned that, what comes to mind is expression, and the ability to have your voice projected out is freeing.
Yeah.
So it seems to make sense.
Yeah.
That it's an important part of self-care too.
Yeah. Also, sitting in cafes, drinking coffee and having a piece of cake. I love doing that. Gluten-free cake, of course.
Gluten-free, yes.
And that's, just for our listeners, I want to stress that that's not for... I'm a celiac, so it's not gluten-free, just as it attempts to be healthy, just because I mentioned...
That is your poison, actually. It's like literally a poison for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I find a cafe that's got gluten-free cakes that I feel like I can safely eat that, I usually overindulge. Because cafes don't always have those. So when they do have it, it's like an excuse to myself, like, oh, this is, you can care for yourself here.
It's true. I would like to point out that in this work that I've been doing with men, it's actually surprisingly common how we tend to be quite dismissive of our own self-care, and that's why it's hard for us to bring it up. And while you're having your stuck moment, I was also having my stuck moment, because I was like, oh, I remembered I thought about it before, but what is it? We have a tendency to want to serve and to do and to just give, provide, and we don't put enough emphasis into how we build it out, and we are dismissive of it, even we like to say, okay, sleep is one for me. Well, I'm just going to talk about myself now. It's how I self-care is sleep, having some alone time, and replenishing my energies in terms of if I sort out my immediate space. I talked about it just now about doing cleaning and things like that. I find that it's a very effective part of my self-care, because my mind gets more into order. I also enjoy playing guitar like you do, and I'm not in process of actually learning any sort of new things, so I'm completely playing out of my own creative flow. And I totally understand what you mean about the expression, and just relaxing with the guitar and feeling like almost the tune or the music from the guitar strings is almost a form of soothing. It's like the gift that keeps giving, as long as you're playing something. I recently heard from another brother in our group who talked about learning new techniques around self-soothing, and I haven't really I haven't had a real deep dive around this topic of self-soothing, but it's certainly something that he brought up as a thing that I can relate to, in terms of not really getting very much of that when I was younger. Particularly because soothing is developed from the interaction between the child and the mother. Typically speaking, it's not that fathers can't do it, but it's typically speaking comes from the mother. Well, my mother and my relationship was probably more conservative, and through our upbringing, there's not a lot of physical affection that goes on. I think it's quite common for people with Asian heritage. Now, I as a result of that, I never really learned my own techniques of soothing myself or touching myself or touching myself. we tend to associate it with just the sexual, masturbation stuff. But okay, if we leave that out of the question, because we're not talking about that right now, it just got awkward all of a sudden. It's about how we caress ourselves, how we massage ourselves. I think that is an important part of how we relate to ourselves in that sense. So self-care, the topic of that goes into being self-aware even. For example, when we start our circles, we check in with what is your energy levels from a 0 to 10 scale. 10 being the most energetic, 0 being completely flat. But the self-awareness around, I'm checking in with an energy level of about 6 means that, you're kind of like tipping towards the point of really being a bit more tired, about the halfway mark. So you can understand your capacity to give from that point of view. When someone has more of an understanding or awareness that, I've got an energy level of 1 or 2, then suddenly there's this ability to check in and go, I really need to get into self-care mode. And if it means get more sleep, better. If it means take some time out to chill out by yourself and go into the Mandan, then do just that. The awareness is I think fundamental to start with. We tend to try to promote these things about self-care. Then, hence, we get also into the other dynamic where we're going. At what point can I allow this to happen? Because if I've got responsibilities like looking after children, or I've got responsibilities for work, how can you tell your boss I've got to have a self-care day, and when you know you might really need it, and then just bugger off and not go to work, because that's not on either. So how do we distinguish between that whether I'm doing this for self-care, or when it's work related and you don't turn up for work, then it becomes a bit selfish. What would you add to that?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is, I think when it comes to work, taking self-care day, or some workplaces call it mental health day, whatever they call it, however they depict it, I think a good question to ask yourself is, will I be more productive if I do take this time off? Does it benefit my workplace?
Mm-hmm.
If I do take today off, or half a day, whatever it is, so that I'm better when I come back and rejuvenated, and I can actually be more productive. But if I just try and stick it out, I might still be able to just keep working, but it's of a lower quality, and I'm suffering more. So I think it can benefit a workplace for people to take that kind of time off. So that's something I think to remind yourself, to take away some of the guilt.
Yeah.
And to be able to distinguish between whether you're being selfish, or if you actually need the self-care. Just a way of detecting within yourself, like, am I just can I just not be bothered going to work? Because a lot of people feel like, can't be bothered going to work. And it's not necessarily in need of self-care, it's just for whatever reason they just can't be bothered, lack of motivation or whatever.
Yeah, or lazy. Yeah. What you brought up is a very good point, because we are talking about self-care in terms of the long-term strategy. You take immediate care for yourself, but for a longer benefit and how it affects others. I think one thing that came up that I recall with the discussion was how selfishness is about having other people deal with consequences of actions. So I get the impression that when we're doing self-care, it is really focused on the individual taking self-care, and there's no real consequence that happens to others as a result. Like taking a walk by yourself might build you up a lot, but it's not gonna it's not gonna harm anyone. Whereas taking time off or not showing up to work when it's necessary to correspond to a particular schedule that's been put together by the manager means that the one's absence might mean that someone else has to cover in the last minute, and it'll stress out everyone as a result. So perhaps in that frame, that is more selfish because of the consequence. So the whole element around responsibility comes into that. Like at that time or that moment, where's do you have the space to be responsible for yourself, or do you have a responsibility for others? Perhaps that I would see that might be the distinction between self-care or self-love, or building oneself out, versus being solely self-focused, like in narcissistic way, to use the word.
Yeah, I think there's another aspect to it as well, that where it may not involve other people, but where self-care can start becoming self-destructive, and can start hurting you instead of helping you, even if it doesn't affect other people in the way that you've been talking about, by burdening others more because you're not fulfilling your responsibilities or showing up. I think about like binging on junk food, like I talked about, sitting in a cafe, having a piece of cake. But if I'm doing that every single day to make myself feel better, then that it's no good. And then you could be sitting in front of the TV, giving yourself that time, that break, and just indulging on ice cream or something, which is in itself is fine. But if you're doing it all the time,
right?
If you're just comfort eating and it's affecting your health, then you can keep justifying it to yourself as self-care. I think some people do.
Oh, they do.
But then
Yeah.
that goes into a new territory of
Justifications. Yeah.
self-harm. Well, that's probably not the right term, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, a very, very, very good point that I'm seeing is how I'll distinguish it is like short-term benefits versus long-term benefits. I think a lot of self-care techniques, like meditation, focus more on the long-term goal of relaxation, for example. I don't think like junk food can necessarily be bad, because it can be quite enjoyable too. Some people require a tub of ice cream after they break up from their partners, and that's fine.
Or 10 tubs. Or 10 tubs.
10 tubs. Okay, maybe, yeah.
Well, I don't think one's going to do it. But
Yeah, okay. That's fair enough. That's fair enough. Maybe, yeah. But you see, 10 tubs is just for the couple of days, maybe a couple of hours. Just for that moment, those 10 tubs of ice cream might be really soothing, because it's comforting, it's grounding, there's some pleasure associated with that. But there comes a point where that's a short-term benefit. That's great, you had a great time. Then we cannot get addicted to that short-term benefit, because in the long run, that habit or the act of having 10 tubs of ice cream would have a negative effect in the long term for health. So then the abstinence from 10 tubs of ice cream a day might mean that that's actually self-care.
the abstinence is
Is self-care too.
much less pleasurable self-care.
Yeah, as much. Discipline is a form of self-care too. There's this saying that discipline will provide the person more freedom than if they didn't have discipline in the first place.
I have heard that, but I haven't heard the idea that discipline is a form of self-care. That's interesting.
I guess if it gives us more freedom to do what we want, then we are building ourselves up more for the long term, which means that ultimately the energy is coming back to us. So I see it as a form of self-care, a routine around a certain sort of practice. Yeah. So there are unpleasant self-care kind of techniques or practices out there.
I've got one funny little example of what I didn't think was self-care, but the person I was with called it self-care. My friend and I were about to jump onto the motorway to drive from the city back to Browns Bay, where we live, and we were about to go on the motorway, and then I realised I had to go to the toilet, and I was like, we were kind of with the flow of the traffic about to go on the motorway, and I was like, and there was a petrol station right there, but it would have required a bit of weird manoeuvring, and it would have been a bit of a thing to try and get off where we were and go into the motorway. I go into the petrol station to go to the bathroom, and I was thinking aloud to my friend in the passenger seat, you know, do I, don't I? And I wasn't going to. I was like, oh, I'm going to stick it out. But I knew I had at least 20-minute drive ahead of me, maybe more, because the traffic was really building up. So at the kind of last minute, I was like, and I decided to do it, to go into the petrol station and use the bathroom. And my friend kept saying, you know, he's a New Yorker, so he's like, yeah, self-care, you got it. You know, he kept calling it self-care. He's like, this guy, he's taking care of himself, you know, self-care. He kept saying things like that. And it was like, I didn't think of it as self-care, but it was like making the ride back to Browns Bay much nicer, and not having to like, it was just, it can come up in funny ways that you don't realize.
It is. And I feel that the thing that I was thinking when you were saying that is like, you knew what you needed at that point of time. And sometimes you need a piss. And then when I thought about that point, I was going, well, a lot of men have a complex around expressing what they need. And if you can't express what you need, or you haven't defined and articulated what they are, how do you know how to care for oneself? On one hand, we dismiss all the things that we're doing already, like having good sleep, having alone time, reading a book, blah, 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 blah. We think, this is what you do, or watching TV. But then, across the other spectrum is what else do we need in life? And how are we working towards getting those needs met? Whether it is a place to talk about issues, or whether it's human connections, community,
Knowing your love languages,
or even going, okay, if some people are going through grief, at what stage are they at, and what do they need to help them with that? A lot of men have this complex around feeling needy, or they're shamed for being needy, so they have a tendency to dismiss all these needs and just go, well, I'm just going to internalize them and just pretend I don't need anyone. But the reality is, human beings are social creatures. We also need each other. So how do you communicate our needs that involve someone else without giving off the vibe of neediness? I have found that when we can express our needs, we are more likely able to get it met. And when we're able to get it met, then the net result is we can give back more. I found a very interesting dichotomy between like people who are always constantly giving and not asking for things, and versus those who keep asking for things and not give anything back. I belong to the camp of doing a lot of things and not asking for anything. I find that there's a bit of a reaction for being shamed for not being independent enough, or being dependent on people. I could see where that was coming from back in the day, because I was just not really I had a core belief that I wasn't worthwhile enough to ask for anything, so I had to sort it out myself. There are others who constantly feel very entitled to everything, and they just ask, and you get. And there's another form of frustration directed to these type of people as well. I would sort of see that there's a very selfish kind of part of the spectrum. But for me, I belong in the spectrum where I was not getting enough of my own needs met by other people. I knew that the more I would deny and enforce my independence, the needier I'll get, and the more urgent and desperate I'll get. So I can start to understand why people reacted negatively when I started asking for my needs to be met, because it came from a desperation.
Right.
That was a very hard lesson. So I'm now becoming more aware that part of my self-care and self-love is to understand what my needs are and how others can help to build it up for me. But from a place where I can be patient about it, I can give people their space to do it, not from a space of desperation. Like, I need attention now. If I'm not going to get it now, I'm going to crumble and make you feel guilty for that. That's a very toxic way of approaching it.
I mentioned love languages because I feel like that's a really important topic when it comes to having needs met. I know for sure that my main love language is touch. But I've been in quite a few, not quite a few, but some key relationships I've been in where the person I was with, touch was nowhere near the top of their love languages. And becoming aware that that's my love language, just knowing that and just being able to sense in new people that I date, whether that's theirs as well, that's a way of communicating or just being aware of a need that I have. And I'm not sure how much I would want to talk about that on the first date. I don't know if it's a suitable topic for early on, but just being aware of it and at some point communicating that to whoever I'm dating. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, sorry. But
the timing is really important about the when it's communicated. I feel that there's an intention to communicate that in I guess, every couple has their own way of communicating stuff. But the act of making it obvious, I feel, or the request known, making the request known is highly important. And I also equate that in the same category of self-care. I care enough about myself to actually ask and request that this is actually what I need. And it's not. When I think about it in that respect, I come from the camp of not being too independent. I start to feel like it triggers a little emotion in me, like, oh, that's selfish when I say that. It's like, do I have a right to even request this? I think there's a lot more shame around, like even asking for a romantic partner for sex, as well as, like, am I going past boundaries? Am I doing appropriately and things like that? Sometimes making it known can make things clearer.
It could be a language you use as well, like instead of saying I need sex, I would love to have sex. Or I need touch, or I need you to hold my hand as we walk. It could just be that word has certain connotations maybe for some people. So it's just like, I'd really like it when when we hold hands, or I really like it when you stroke the back of my neck while I'm driving.
Positive reinforcement. So when it happens, it's just like, oh, that just felt amazing when you touched my shoulder or something.
So it could just be a word.
It could be
framing.
Could be. There are many ways of